Today we're going to look at a special case of motion along a ramp, which is sort of a mix between one and two-dimensional motion. So it's a nice little segue to the next thing we're going to do, which is motion in 2 dimensions for real. Consider here a crate sliding down a smooth ramp to an angle theta. They mean frictionless. What does that mean? Well, we'll talk more about that next chapter, but basically it means that there's no resistance to motion along the ramp. Of course, it can't move through the ramp. The ramp is keeping it out, but it can move along. And they say the angle of the incline is theta. We often say that this is the angle to the horizontal. This is the horizontal direction, and we make this angle to it, which we call theta. Because it's stuck on the ramp, the crate is constrained to also accelerate parallel to the surface. And so we get motion diagrams that look something like this. The velocity steadily increases, the acceleration points downward, always along the ramp. In these sorts of problems, it makes sense often to so-called tilt the axis. So instead of our usual axes, which is a reminder, we've usually said plus y goes that way and plus x goes this way, it's convenient to measure instead motion along the incline, which we'll call plus x, and motion perpendicular to the incline, which we call plus y, because there isn't going to be any of that. So if we do it in this system, then it's really just one-dimensional motion. It's still moving along a line. But we'll need to find how much the acceleration is along the ramp. And then Knight kind of tells us about this. There's a component of the free fall acceleration. We'll talk about this in a second. There's some component along the ramp and some component perpendicular to the ramp. To make some progress, imagine for a moment an object that is simply falling rather than sliding on the ramp. In that case, it would have a free fall acceleration, and that would be magnitude g, and it would point straight down. The object would fall directly downward. Although it would be kind of a weird thing for someone to want to do, we could, in principle, break this acceleration into motion along in the direction of the incline and motion perpendicular to the incline, because we can always take a vector and resolve it into components along perpendicular axes. And those axes can be anything you want. Whether or not they're particularly obvious or natural, you can always pick them. So we can pretend that our object that's falling straight down is actually doing two complicated motions that are put together, something along this direction, which happens to be our incline, and something along this direction, which happens to be perpendicular to that incline, even though it's not moving on the incline. We'll do this in a little bit, of course, to get those actual components. And we don't usually see it. We actually see the combined motion. Now, if we allow the object to sort of slide without resistance along the ramp, then we can say that the ramp, in some sense, blocks the motion along the y direction. Your textbook uses that terminology. I'm not 100% happy with it, but it's constrained to not move in that direction, but there's no constraint along the x direction. So essentially, something is undoing this acceleration. Next unit is when we'll talk about what that is. How do we undo accelerations? How is this going on? And this will be a concept called forces. And we'll talk about how the ramp exerts a force that partially counteracts that of gravity, but is offset, and so only gets rid of this part of the gravitational spit. How do we connect those angles? This is a little bit of trig, actually a little bit of trig geometry, triangle geometry. It's not super important that you follow along on it. That's not true. You should follow along, but it's not going to be super important that you internalize it a lot here. We'll do it a fair bit, and the result that comes out is really important. But the intervening trig, it's something you do once, and then you can remember the result. And what we'll do is we'll compare the triangle made by the incline and the ground and the perpendicular, the vertical. So this one to the triangle made up from the components of the vector. So this one. Those are both right triangles because, of course, the ground is by definition perpendicular to the vertical. And then we have chosen the x and y axes to be perpendicular. So we have two sets of triangles. We have this one highlighted in yellow. And that's a right triangle, so that means that this angle plus this angle equals 90 degrees because this angle plus this angle plus this angle are 180, which means that theta is complementary to beta. They sum to 90 degrees. And then, if we consider this triangle, we see that the angle here, phi, is also complementary to beta because phi plus beta plus the right angle is 180, which means phi plus beta are 90, which means they're complementary. And then there's a result, which is relatively straightforward from triangle stuff, which is two angles complementary to the same angle. So theta plus beta is 90 degrees, and phi plus beta is 90 degrees. So they're each complementary to beta. And then we can just solve this algebraically to say that theta and phi must actually be the same angle. They look the same on the diagram. Turns out they actually really are the same. This allows us to redraw our triangle and using the angle that we were given, theta. We don't need any other auxiliary angles. So we can do our regular triangle trick of saying the sine of an angle is the opposite over the hypotenuse. So ax over g, which we can solve over, say then that a sub x, the amount of acceleration along the incline, is g times sine of theta, where g is still the traditional 9.8 meters per second square. Now you won't really need to derive that over and over again. It works for any ramp inclined at an angle theta to the horizontal. In later units, we're going to allow other things such as friction to come into play, but for now we'll let things that slide down the ramp without hindrance. Note this acceleration is always directed downward along the ramp, so we'll need to adjust the sign to make sure this is reflected. In the case we had drawn, when we had something moving like this, it was convenient to have x be down the ramp and y be perpendicular. But you can easily imagine a ramp that looks like this, and then somebody might well pick x to be up the ramp and y to be perpendicular to keep x and y in their usual orientation. But in that case, the acceleration is down the ramp, so in this case ax would be minus g sine theta. So you'll just need to make sure, just like before, what your direction is and whether your acceleration is along it or not. Notice we're not really changing the definition. Just like we said before, objects fall with an acceleration g directly downward. Now we say that objects fall with or roll down a ramp with an acceleration of g sine theta down the ramp, whatever down the ramp means in the coordinate system you've chosen to use. So now a couple of example things. 1. A ball rolls up the ramp and then back down. What is the correct acceleration graph? Take a moment to pick one, and then we'll talk about it. All right, so our expression is that ax is going to be ax is going to be g sine theta, and then we see that it's opposed. The acceleration is down the ramp, and plus s is up the ramp. So I'm going to put a minus sign here, and that tells us two important things. 1, the acceleration has a magnitude that's constant, it's g sine theta, and 2, it should be always negative. So not constant, right? If we start looking here, not constant, not constant, not constant, close to, but because of that, not constant. And then we also have not negative. So we're left with this one as our answer. The acceleration would be g. One little caveat, or at least thing that's true that they kind of hit here, we'll see later, much later in the class, that things that are rolling are different than things that are sliding. And so technically, I sort of lied to you a little bit with this. There's going to be a modification. It's going to be this times some number, but it doesn't change that it's constant or down the ramp. All right, a box slides down a frictionless ramp and is seen to have an acceleration of 6.3 meters per second square. What is the angle of the ramp to the nearest tenth of a degree? So we should generally draw pictures, although it's not going to be that big a deal. We have this, and we're told that the acceleration is seen to be down the ramp at 6.3 meters per second squared. And if I take my typical tilted axis, so that this is plus x, and plus y that way, then I have that ax is g sine theta. So sine of theta is ax over g. To undo the sine function, I have to apply the inverse sine function. But having done that to one side, I have to do it to the other. And then the good news, there's a couple of things that happen. 1, sine, inverse sine of sine is constructed to give us just theta. And over here we'll have inverse sine of 6.3 meters per second square over 9.8 meters per second square. But that's all just numbers, and your Plastic Pal is able to do that. That's something built into any calculator. Making sure you're in degree mode, you'll end up with 40.0 degrees. And some other digits, but to the nearest tenth, 40.0. Alright, a ski jump is a ramp that is 110 meters long and makes an angle of 55 degrees to the horizontal. What speed in meters per second does a skier attain at the bottom of the ramp if she starts from rest at the top of the ramp? So let's draw our picture. And it's important to note that we are told that the ramp is 110, so this distance is 110. And we're also told that the angle is 55 to the horizontal. Our skier starts at rest at the top. And we want to know at the bottom how fast is the skier going. Now, this is a one-dimensional problem, and so if we were to sort of set up our problem, we'd have something like, well, ti is 0 and xi is 0, because we might as well measure from here. All right, this is our origin, and then vi is 0 because they told us that. And TF is unknown, but XF is known to be 110, and VF is unknown, but it is what I want. And then there would be AX, and AX is G sine theta, which turns out to be 8.03 meters per second square when you actually type in the numbers. So we see this as a thing where we don't have the time, we don't want the time, we do want a thing that has VF in it, and so we're going to end up with an equation that looks something like VF square equals VI square plus 2AX delta X, or VF squared is 0 meters per second quantity squared plus 2 times 8.03 meters per second square times the 110 meters. That comes out to be 1766.6 meters square per second square. And then that tells us that VF, which is the root of 1766.6 meters square per second square, turns out to be 42.0 meters per second. So that's how fast. 42 meters per second is actually pretty fast, because 25-ish, or 24 is basically 55. So this is almost 110 miles an hour, which is pretty good, but it's a pretty long ramp, and it's a pretty steep angle. Anyway, that sort of is the bridge now, because these are still, notice, really one-dimensional problems. Even though there's a two-dimensional motion going on, we're able to resolve it into along a certain line. And so we can treat it as just one-dimensional motion. The next kind of problems we're going to do will not be able to do that. They'll move not along a line, but along some sort of curve. So we'll need at least 2 dimensions. And then we'll do the same kind of trick, though, and we'll talk about motion in 3 dimensions. And the key bit will be that we can almost always resolve 3-dimensional motion into motion along a plane. And so even though it looks like you're moving through 3-dimensional space, we can still treat it as a 2-dimensional problem. But that's a little bit ways down the way.